What is up, guys? It is time for a little early Memorial Day Live Before Lock. Got ourselves a 9-game slate here coming up in the world of MLB, and we will take you through game by game to give you the best plays and pitching and all the options you can find for yourself today on the MLB DFS slate. I am Kris Spags, joined once again by a man who I've seen far too many times over the last few days, but that is the grind here in the name of the NBA, the MLB, all the sports we're covering. He's Nerd-Ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
All right, neck's a little sore. I had a little injury, but other than that, I'm ready to talk some baseball. I've got a new computer for streaming that's not yet set up yet, but it's on the ground next to me, so that's something that will come in handy in the future. So yeah, some big improvements in life.
That's a lot of excitement here. I'm glad you teased us with that computer. Don't break it out today. But the good news is we do have Greg here live and in person, or I guess as in person as he can be. We also have some free premium tools on the day. That includes a top pitchers tool for MLB. So we're going to reference some of the top pitching odds, chances of guys to end up in that either top 2 on Draftkings or number 1 overall pitcher spot relative to their ownership. So make sure to go check it out for free today for yourself. And also make sure to go check out our sponsor, PrizePicks, who's offering the simplest fantasy game on the market. You can say goodbye to sharks, lineup optimizers, and mass multi-entry. Simply pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board to go over or under their projected score. If you correctly select a 5-player lineup, you can net yourself up to 10x your entry fee from the NFL and NBA to esports and MLB. PrizePicks has it. You can combine your picks across all the sports available. So just like a cross-sport parlay for your fantasy projections, download the mobile app in the App Store or on Google Play today. Make your first deposit to get an instant deposit match of up to $100 when you use the promo code Awesemo. $100 deposit match. That is one of the biggest ones you will find from any provider out there because of the simplicity on PrizePicks. Honestly, great way to use that bankroll, especially if you are tired of competing in the big tournaments. To simplify daily fantasy with PrizePicks today, and use that promo code Awesemo for a $100 deposit match. And also make sure to come back in a few hours because we're going to run it back one more time for the afternoon slate that tips off, or I guess first pitch is off at around 4 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be me and Terry at 3 p.m. Eastern coming back for an MLB deeper dive. But Greg, let's get into this one because we got a lot of games to hit on here in a short amount of time. But any overarching thoughts for you for the slate and your overall approach, whether it be about pitching, bats, or anything you've observed, or do you just want to go into the game by game?
We could just go into the game by game. Corbin Burnsley, I think a lot of people know how I feel about him at this point, so I'm going to be super heavy on him. The field is as well, but I think it's justified. So a lot of my lineups are going to be figuring out how could I fit as much Corbin Burns into them as possible.
Yeah, let's get into the game by game of it all. Tampa Bay, 4 implied runs going against Jameson Taillon. And this is a slate where maybe shockingly high ownership for Jameson Taillon expected, just shy of 20%. His price tag does work. Strikeouts have been there for him, a 28% K rate on the year, up from a 23.7% K rate since 2019. And he's facing a Tampa Bay team that strikes out at a 25.9% clip against right-hand pitching on the year. 5 guys to strike out over league average in the lineup. I get the matchup here, Greg, and I do think the park playing a little bit cooler today, 60-degree weather expected at Yankee Stadium, so that's a bit of an inhibitor compared to the usual power people could see there. But Taillon at 20% ownership, I'm just not the biggest believer in him, and I do think there is still a good enough bullpen. And Taillon, too, an 11% barrel ball rate on the year, 20.5-degree launch angle. Like, there's some bad signifiers for him that show the volatility, 5% home run rate for the year, and that's one of those numbers that, on a cooler day, maybe he gets away with it. Maybe the strikeouts land a little bit more. But Taillon's just one of those risky pitchers to me. That 20% ownership feels like way too much.
Yeah, I'm surprised the field's getting to him that much, just because his underlying numbers this year are really good, but the ERA isn't good. He's a 5.06 ERA, but a 3.64 expected ERA. His strikeout rate is up this year all the way up to 28%, which is by far the highest of his career. And also, this is a guy who switched teams, and it's a situation we've seen a lot over the last few years. Somebody who used to be on the Pirates is no longer on the Pirates. Uptick in their strikeout rate, the underlying numbers look better. And this is kind of the type of spot that I'd like to attack. However, the field's already there with the ownership. And like I said, I'm surprised. This isn't usually the type of player the field is on. Usually a guy who's cheap that's struggling from a run allowance perspective, but has good underlying numbers. That's usually somebody the field doesn't touch. But considering the field is actually there, just given what the ownership is, I kind of think it makes sense to stack up the Rays.
Yeah, I could see where you're going with that one. The Rays, it looks like going to be a little bit under-owned according to the top stack. So actually a decent amount of leverage on the top stack. So 6.7% chance of being a top stack, 4.2% ownership. And yeah, Taillon, I think the one issue with him is that if he does get that hook, it's a very good bullpen behind him. I would grade out the Yankees bullpen based on their performance this year to be probably the best bullpen on the slate, a 1.1 whip, under a 200 batting average allowed. But I think besides that, though, like if you do get to Taillon, if Taillon stays in that game, certainly can get hit hard. You have some competent hitters here in the middle of the order. Seems seems like mostly unowned. I guess it's hard to pay over $6K for Randy Arozarena on DraftKings. Austin Meadows also over 5,000. Is this somewhere, Greg, where you would get to those high priced bats, or you want to take the cheaper guys who are going to be a little bit more appropriately owned?
I'm still good with the higher price bats because once again, as a whole, this team is not picking up as much ownership as it looks like they should. It's a team that we have with actually, let's see, they are second best leverage score on the entire slate. The Cubs are best, but the Rays second best. We have the Cubs with a 2.6% leverage, positive leverage score. The Rays at 2.5%. And given how spread out the slate is in terms of there being a lot of teams, and also it's going to be really wonky because we don't usually have slates where the games are this far spread apart, where we have games starting at 1 o'clock and then we have a game starting all the way back to 5 o'clock that's going to be on the slate Eastern time. So with that in mind, I think the ownership is going to be pretty flat as far as offenses go, and I'm just going to look for the ones that are going a little bit under-owned. So I'm not too concerned about any individual hitter ownership here.
On the other side, we're going to have Rich Hill going, and Rich Hill recently has had some really high upside games at a price tag that still, certainly allow a lot of upside relative to that salary. But I think it's sort of hard to trust Rich Hill for me, just relative to his on the year numbers. The 28% K rate does look good. 1.02 whip also looks good. 1% ownership today also looks good. But the projection not really popping, just over 15 fantasy points from Awesemo today. I don't necessarily see Rich Hill being a guy that I'd want to go back to. Low velocity, form velocity has been down despite some better results this year. And this Yankees lineup, we know about the dangerous power, but also just basically a league average strikeout team this year, a 24.1% K rate, which is in line with what the average has been this year. So to me, Rich Hill in the spot, I don't mind getting there as a tournament option if the price tag lines up. But Greg, I don't really see the reason to go to Hill. And because Hill's been so good as well, I don't really have a ton of love for the Yankee stack either.
Yeah, I feel like Rich Hill is only pitching well to despite me right now. Like I think he's doing this just as a direct attack to me because I come on, I call him old, I make fun of him, and then he goes out and then nobody hits him anymore. Like he started the year really poorly, and then he's been pitching much better as of late. The strikeout stuff has been up. He's not working super deep into games, but I mean overall the numbers are really really strong. 3.63 ERA, 3.79 expected ERA. The strikeouts are back up to where they were a couple of years ago. So. It's weird, right? You look at his numbers last year, and it was a really off year for Rich Hill, where the strikeout rate was way down. He had a 5.1 expected ERA, and you consider he's over the age of 40, velocity's on the decline. And I thought it was a reasonable stance to take that, hey, Rich Hill just old and on the decline, not a good pitcher anymore. And now he's right back to where he was a few years ago. So I don't really like to make a habit of rostering pitchers against this Yankees lineup. But at the same time, too, like you said, I don't think the Yankees make for an ideal stack at the same time.
Yeah, so both sides here, certainly tournament options to get to if you are feeling strongly, but I think we are on the same page that not the strongest feelings for this spot, and certainly one that could go either way. Not a bad run total for the Yankees, though, 4.5 implied runs for them. Next game up, and hit that like button if you can, guys. We appreciate it a bunch here. Obviously, we're all grinding on Memorial Day. You guys playing out there, us doing the show, and playing as well, so make sure to hit that like button if you can. Show us a little love, and subscribe to the channel. As you can tell, we have content going on all day long today. That includes all the usual run of shows, so if you want to watch some NBA Live Before Lock, NBA Deeper Dive, the MLB Deeper Dive, the tip-off, it's all coming up later today, and some of which will include Greg and myself as well. So go hang out with us and check out all the content we have on the channel. Next game up, we got Minnesota, 4.6 implied runs against Jorge Lopez, and Minnesota, a team that will be very highly owned today, but also has one of the better probabilities to be a top stack on the day. Awesemo has it as a 12% chance of being a top stack. Jorge Lopez has been a pretty bad pitcher on the year. One thing that he has going for him, though, is he does tend to keep the ball down. 19% soft contact rate is one of the better marks in the slate, as is 29% fly ball rate. He also keeps a pretty low 5.8 degree launch angle. So a team like Minnesota certainly can get some production here. It could be a little bit tougher going against Jorge Lopez than people realize, Greg. And I feel like that's something for Lopez that I think we've talked about recently. And there was a game where he did give up some runs last week, and I'm kind of blanking on the matchup, but I know we had talked about it specifically and mentioned like, oh, this could be a bit of a fool's gold situation where like he's given up production, but it's not the kind of home run production that really does help teams out. That said, he's facing Minnesota, so you can make the case to me that if there's ever going to be a day Jorge Lopez is going to get bombed, I do think this could be it, Greg, but I just don't see Lopez. A, he's not a viable play to me, but B, I don't know he's going to get crushed by Minnesota enough to justify the really lofty ownership it's going to be there.
Yeah, so Minnesota's certainly going to be my player pool. We do have them as one of the top stacks of the day. However, they also are going a little bit over-owned in our top stack stool. And getting to back to what you said about Jorge Lopez, his recent starts certainly aren't good, but it's not really like he's absolutely getting destroyed out there either. His last start, 6 innings, 3 runs, 5 innings, 2 runs, 2 innings, 4 runs. That's pretty bad. But it's like a lot of games in there where it's like he pitches 5 innings and he gives up 2 or 3 runs. And he hasn't given up multiple home runs in a start since April 16th. He has 2 starts all year where he gave up 2 home runs. Other than that, he's a guy who keeps the ball on the ground. It limits the amount of homers he allows. So the Twins, certainly a viable stack, but I just don't want them as much as the field. And I agree with what you said before, too, where Jorge Lopez, while he's not good, he's not quite a gas can who just gets obliterated either.
Yeah, and it's certainly some potential, for the variance to go and for him to have one of those days where he does get banged up, but it's only a 67-degree day in Baltimore, so they're not getting quite the full benefit of what Baltimore's park can play for power. So to me, I have no issue getting to some of these guys, but they're all loftily owned, and the only guys it looks like who will be unowned on the team are going to be Rob Refsnyder, Kyle Garlick, Andrelton Simmons at the bottom of the order. So keep that in mind if you are stacking up the Twins. But Greg, if you were to stack up the Twins, you were to go these guys' way, which ones jump out to you? I feel like the 2 through 6 to me are particularly strong. I wouldn't mind getting to Jorge Polanco up top, but I think if you're playing Twins, to me, it's a very easy look to go to Donaldson, Kirilloff, Cruz, Garver, and Sano, and maybe you take one of those guys out, take one of the lower-owned guys out of Refsnyder, Garlick, and Simmons, but I do think the Donaldson, Kirilloff, Cruz, Garver, Sano grouping, to me, that's like the 5-man stack. That's incredibly obvious.
Yeah, and the field kind of bears that out, too, because we have pretty not ridiculous ownership on these guys, except for the size of the slate. Polanco, Donaldson, Cruz, Garver, Sano, Kirilloff, all of these guys are in between 15 and 20% rostered right now. So there is a significant amount of ownership going to this overall as a team. And there isn't any one individual hitter who's good that you could look at and be like, oh, I'm going to make this a way different stack. If you want to go to the bottom of the order and say hey, I'm going to go roster, Andrelton Simmons, Rob Refsnyder for 5% owned or less. Okay, that makes it different, but I don't necessarily think that's optimal. So I think my overall stance to the Twins here, make some stacks and just don't make quite as much as the field is doing.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable way to look at it. I don't mind Refsnyder because of the cheap price tag, and Garlick too, also fairly cheap. Simmons, I think maybe getting a little bit too cute, but he doesn't strike out very much. So I think there's an argument to be made here, and if you want to get different, that is the way to do it. To me, I think taking a one-off from Minnesota looks a little bit more appealing because I think there's a one-off bomb here. I just don't know that I have the highest faith in the whole stack getting there. On the other side, we're going to have Jose Barrios going. Pretty steep price tag for Barrios, but he's been better on the year, up to a 27.5% K rate. Swinging strike rate and chase rate, though, are pretty much in line. And actually, the chase rate's down for him enough that I think the swing and strike rate might regress closer to the 24.3% mark that he's been at since 2019. And there's a lot of ownership going to Barrios, and I don't get it. I would rather find the $500 and get to Corbin Burns. And I know we've had some disappointing Corbin Burns days lately, but he's going against Detroit. I just don't get 22% ownership for Barrios. That is so much for a guy who's basically right at the price tag of the best, but certainly the highest owned pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, and but overall, look at because I'm just running the lineups, my lineups right now as we're getting some of the lineups come in. Like the Cubs just came in, so I'm constantly refreshing that. But one thing is, if you look at the overall pitchers on the slate, I'm starting to realize this now, is because at first glance, you just look at the ownership. It's like, why is Ty on 20%? Why is this guy at 20%? And then you look at the pitching options, you go, oh, they suck. It's a 9-game slate, but there aren't that many good pitching options to choose from. So this is something that's having me come out super high on Corbin Burns, and Carlos Rodon, a good option as well. But beyond that, it's kind of hard to find cheaper pitching, and that's why we're seeing some odd ownership going to some of these guys.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think, I could sort of see the case, though, at the other price tags. Like Barrios, though, you think people are playing Burns and Barrios? Because I think they'd be playing Barrios instead of Burns, and I just don't. I don't see the reason to be there. Baltimore does strike out at a 25.6% clip. So maybe I'm not giving Barrios enough credit here as a direct pivot to Burns, but he just looks over on the top stacks tool. And I know there's a 40% ownership difference between Burns and Barrios, but I just really don't think that. Man, I just don't see the reason to be there that much. He's still really chalky, and I just feel like if you're 7,800 or it's high on price range, sure, go there. But the same price as Burns, I just don't want to be there.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing too is, so we currently have Rodon as expected to pitch right now in the top stacks tool, except the White Sox haven't officially named a starter, so that's going to change some of this. Also, we have the White Sox, the Indians are playing a doubleheader today. And we have a starter, it looks like, for the White Sox second game, but not their first game. So that's also something that's going to make the overall pitching a little bit different. But for it, what do you expect for the White Sox pitching? I know this isn't exactly in line with the question of what we're talking about, but as I'm just running my lineups now, it's starting to become pretty relevant where it's I don't know who's pitching for Chicago.
I have Rodon going, but that was, I don't think that's been confirmed anywhere. We do have him in the projections as going, but Yeah. So to me, like, again, I guess that ties in maybe more to why I wouldn't go to Barrios, is that I do think Rodon would be the better pivot to go to a little more expensive, a little more ownership, but I'm comfortable with that as a guy instead of Burns, given the numbers on the year. But yeah, like if you gave me the choice here, and I guess if you don't think Rodon's pitching, then yeah, Barrios does make a little more sense. But just relative to price tags, like I think Rodon and Burns are the guys that are a cut above, and Barrios to me, like he's being treated like he's in that tier, but I just don't think he's anywhere close to that tier.
Yeah, it's just relative to some of the other options. I'm getting to some of Barrios right now. I don't have Rodon in my player pool, but I'm going to have to add him in if he officially gets named as a starter. So that's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on.
And Baltimore Hitters, I think not a whole lot of reason to talk there. I'm assuming you don't have a ton of interest. They are a team that's not gotten the best results on the year against righties, a 138 ISO as a team overall, but maybe some interest here. They are low owned, so I guess I'll throw it to you. And I know you do occasionally like to play the Orioles, so do you like them at all?
Not in this spot. There have been, as far as bad offenses go that I've gotten exposure to and actually had some success with, the Orioles are up there, but I don't think this is particularly the best slate for it. Let's see, we have Baltimore right now with just 3% chance to be a top stack on the slate. They're going a little bit under owned. So if you want to play 2 or 3% Orioles, if you're playing 150 lineups, I think that's reasonable. It does get you to about double the field, but not a primary stack at all. And if you're only playing 1, 3, 20 lineups, then you just ignore Baltimore.
All right, next game up, we got Detroit getting 2.5 implied runs against the aforementioned Corbin Burns. And Corbin Burns' projection just blows away everybody else's. He has over a 27 fantasy point projection. The closest one, I think, on the slate besides that is going to be Rodon, and he is about 7 fantasy points less. So that sort of puts it in the perspective of that conversation that we just had about some of these guys. But Burns' strikeout rate's been fantastic on the year, 42.5% K rate, 0.65 whip, so he's not giving up anything at all, 1.7 xFIP. Going against a Detroit team that strikes out at a 27% clip against right-hand pitching on the year. Doesn't have a lot in the way of power either, only a 146 ISO, 88 WRC plus, means they're creating runs about 12% less than the general public. And Burns, to me, just one of those guys, I don't even know sometimes how he has no flaws at all in what we look at data-wise. We're a 4.7 degree launch angle, so he's keeping the ball down. He's not getting barreled at all, a 5.5% barreled ball rate. Like nothing here, Greg, jumps out to me just to point to go like, oh, this guy, maybe this is going to get worse. Burns is just a monster in this spot against Detroit. I don't know how you're not playing him. Maybe 100% in baseball is a little bit tough, but if you're not playing him at least with the field, and to me, 80, 90% even, I think that's just the wrong move.
Yeah, I have him right around 90% right now. And also, I mean, you look at the underlying numbers for Corbin Burns, and you said you don't see a way it gets worse. If anything, it gets better. He has a 2.33 ERA, and the numbers suggest he's unlucky to have a 2.33 ERA. He has a 1.37 expected ERA. He has a 1.06 FIP. His numbers are actually pretty much in line with Jacob deGrom's this year. They have pretty similar wins above replacement, but the strikeouts are crazy for Burns. He never walks anybody. He has a 2.9% walk rate, so only a few walks the entire season, and he's unhittable, keeping the ball in the strike zone. So Corbin Burns is by a mile the best play on this slate. The ownership is at 60% right now, and I would much rather be over than under that number.
Yeah, and he's also been efficient too. Like for some of these higher strikeout guys, you're going to see numbers, starting to get closer to 5, pitches per appearance, and he's at 4. Like he's just really everything looks good for Burns in a way that I think is hard to see. And if he's going to have some games that are going to be down, it's sort of hard to imagine having one of those down games against a Detroit team that's got nothing. Detroit Hitters, Greg, any interest there to be the ultimate contrarian bats?
No. In the interest of time, that's an easy no.
Tyler Alexander on the other side has also not been very good. He's, I wouldn't say the exact opposite of Corbin Burns, but certainly getting much worse results. 20.9% K rate, 4.2 xFIP is not the worst, but giving up a 270 batting average. Overall, Alexander looks like a guy who you can target against if you want, though the Brewers have struck out a lot against left-hand pitching on the year, 27.5% K rate. And Anderson's been getting guys to chase pretty well. That doesn't convert to strikeouts for him, but it is interesting that he has a 44% chase rate that's up from the 35% mark that he's had since 2019. So maybe there's some hope for him to be useful in whatever 1.5 innings that'll pitch. But Greg, not a pitcher that looks that good, but I would also say it's a bullpen day behind Alexander, it looks like mostly, or I don't know if Alexander is going to be pitching that deep based on his overall numbers this year. But the Milwaukee lineup too, I don't really find a whole lot to love there. So to me, everything besides Burns this game might be a stay away.
Yeah, the only time that Tyler Alexander's worked more than 2 innings in a game all year was April 30th against the Yankees. So pretty reasonable to expect that Alexander isn't going to work deep into the game. Even when he's on the mound, I don't expect him to have that much success. He's topped out at 7.9 DraftKings points this year. So I think going against him makes a little bit of sense here. Milwaukee's offense in general hasn't been great, but they are starting to get a little bit healthier now. And if you look at the numbers for them today, I mean, we have them with a 5.7% chance to be the top stack of the day. So I think it's a team to at least have in our player pool. Not a primary stack by any means, except it's a team worth getting to about even with the field.
Yep. So I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And it is a bad pitcher and a bad bullpen. So maybe there's a little more logic than I'm giving him credit for, but 5.7% chance of being the top stack, 5% ownership. So a little bit under owned according to that top stacks tool. Next game up, we got Philadelphia, 4.1 implied runs going against Wade Miley, one of the illustrious pitchers who's thrown a no-hitter this year. And Miley's got a 19% K rate for himself, basically the same pitcher he's been every year. Guy who keeps the ball down very well, a 19.5% fly ball rate, which should help him out pitching in Cincinnati. But going in this spot for Miley, I don't see any reason to have faith there, unless you really want to target guys who occasionally have one good game. I mean, he is going against a team that strikes out at a 30% clip against left-hand pitching, so maybe Miley gets a little bit closer to league average with the strikeouts. But Greg, for me, I guess you maybe play a little bit of Miley, 2% owned if you want to get there, but it's not a guy I expect to have great results today. I think if the price tag works, then maybe getting him into a few seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly cheap at 6,500, and he's only picking up 2% ownership, although I am running my lineups right now, and it looks like I have 0% Wade Miley. Let's see if I have any lineups with him. If I have one, I'll make it a point to say that. But no, I have 0% Wade Miley right now, and it's a number I'm comfortable with when it comes to Wade Miley. So also from a fantasy perspective, he's never been that great of an option. Even when he was in his peak days of a few years ago, he was never the highest strikeout guy in the world. 34 years old now, doesn't throw particularly hard, doesn't have the best stuff. And if you look at his strikeout numbers, they're just really non-existent. 18.9% K rate this year. The highest K rate he's ever had in his career was when he was a younger pitcher. So 2014, 21.1% K rate. So even the best Wade Miley outings are generally relying on him getting hit fairly hard and the ball just going to fielders. We have not the best pitching options on the slate, but there are at least options that are better than Wade Miley.
Yeah, Wade Miley's best outcome is really hanging in the game. He does pitch over 5 innings per start, but so you just need him to kind of work efficiently, maybe luck into a few more strikeouts, but and maybe that's possible, but it doesn't seem like a great spot for him to actually get them and earn them himself. Philadelphia Hitters, though, going against Miley, I don't see a lot of reason to go there. It is a good park for hitting, or, a park that's at least a lateral move for them. For the most part, though, for Philly, they seem appropriately owned. Actually, no, a little bit under owned the top stack, so maybe I'm missing something, but I just like a guy like Miley whose one job is just run prevention, keeping the ball down, not ones I normally try to target. And I guess, Greg, do you feel any strong feelings here for Philly, given that they do seem to be one of the most under-owned teams on the top stacks tool?
Yeah, so in the latest run of ownership we just got here, it does look like Philly's going fairly low owned. They only have a 4% ownership share with a 7.5% chance to be a top stack. So with that in mind, that does make it a team that I want to get to. With Wade Miley this year, his numbers, it's still a really high ground ball rate, so that's a little concerning for upside, except I don't know. I'm looking at the numbers. I think I just disagree with it a little bit. I don't know that the Phillies actually warrant a whole ton of ownership. I usually rely pretty heavily on the top stacks tool. But just look at some of these numbers, like Wade Miley pitches to contact, ground ball pitcher, his numbers for the year, 3.5 ERA, 3.79 expected ERA. I don't think it's unreasonable to think the Phillies go out and score 3 or 4 runs. I'm just not sure there's that much upside here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I get it on the top stack stool. If you are a person who does play religiously by the top stack stool, you're going to get better results more often than not, but it is still something where you got to sort of make your own decisions. And then for me, this is one spot that I just wouldn't mind getting a little bit less here of Philly than is being suggested right now. The other side, we have Vince Velasquez. Vince Velasquez, hopefully most people out there know the deal with him, where he's chasing strikeouts every time he's out there. As a result, not pitching that many innings per appearance, 3.6 innings per appearance on the year. He does have a 29.4% K rate, so when he's running good, he definitely can get there. But Cincinnati's only struck out at a 23% clip on the year. They do have 7 guys that strike out above league average in the lineup, but still, not getting the results overall in the year. I don't mind getting to Vince Velasquez a little bit, though I do prefer him more when he's cheaper at a price tag that absorbs some of the risk that you have to take playing him. But Vince Velasquez, to me, Greg, like a sort of appropriately owned play, maybe even a little bit over owned at 11.7% for himself. And Cincinnati as well. Like I think they're a little more viable at target, but they also look very over owned according to the top stacks tool. So kind of a tough spot ownership wise here.
Yeah, I agree. Not a whole lot of interest in the bats. Velasquez is a little bit of somebody who I'm getting to. Not a really high priority play, but just given what the strikeouts are and that there aren't that many viable SP2s on the slate, he's somebody who's coming in around 10% of my lineups right now, which I think that's fine. Like, he's a guy who, if the salary works, if you need the salary savings to get away from, Carlos Rodon or Corbin Burns, then yeah, it's fine to throw Vince Velasquez into the player pool, but not somebody I'm dying to roster. Also, in terms of his innings per outing, don't forget, he also made a handful of appearances out of the bullpen. So I don't really think that necessarily means that we're expecting him just go really short into this game, because we've seen him pitch extended innings sometimes, and he's just a really volatile pitcher. And even with the 2.95 ERA this year, he hasn't been quite that great. It's a 4.63 expected ERA, high strikeouts, high walks. So there's a little bit of upside there. And I think probably the best way to sum it up is, like I said before, I have about 10% of them.
Any hitters you would prioritize if you wanted to play the Reds? It does seem like we mentioned here, the top 5 of the order all going to be over 10% owned. So very appropriate ownership for these guys. And I guess if I had to prioritize anybody, it'd probably be Eugenio Suarez in the leadoff spot. I also don't hate Castellanos at his price tag, but again, just these guys to me, like, appropriately owned. So I wouldn't be there. But Greg, for you, if you were to play the Reds, any bats would be particular priorities for you?
Not really. Just looking through my ownership right now, and I don't have that much Reds exposure. And even the guys that I do have in here, it's not like I feel great about them. Like, Eugenio Suarez is having a really rough year relative to what we expect from him. He's only gotten hits in, what is it, like 3 of his last 10 games now. And overall, if you look at his numbers this year, they're pretty underwhelming. So they've been moving him around the batting order a lot, just trying to spark something, and it hasn't really helped him at all. If I had to roster one guy, I guess it would just be Tucker Barnhart, because he's a reasonably priced catcher and it's a tough position to fill, but not really. Tyler Stevenson's an okay enough value play, 3,100, but this is a team that I think is going over-owned.
Actually, Max Schrock at 2K flat, you could sort of make the case he hasn't had the biggest sample size in the majors, only 41 at bats against a lefty, but like, he is a guy who exists who's going to be in the 5 hole, and I think that might be enough to play him a little bit. I don't have the highest confidence levels, but Velasquez has struggled against lefties historically, giving up a 1.6 whip since 2019, a little bit less in the way of home runs, but still giving up a 270 batting average. So Schrock, to me, at minimum salary, I think is maybe one off you can get to. And to Greg's point about Suarez, 19% ownership going to Suarez. So if you are a believer in just fading a guy who's running bad, or maybe just has something wrong with him injury wise or luck wise, whatever the case may be, he's going to be owned by about a 5th of the field, it looks like. So that's one guy to take out of the pool if you want to go that way. Let's get one more game in, and then we'll do a quick run of money time as well. But we got game number 5 on the board, San Diego. This is one where we didn't have implied total starting the day. They might be out now, but I'm honestly not sure if they come out yet. Expectation is Keegan Thompson is pitching for the Cubs as an opener or pseudo opener, but I don't know if you see anything else, Greg. I think it's Thompson, but I don't know if you know if it's another pitcher.
By the way, also, because it's been posted in the chat a few times, I went and looked it up. Carlos Rodon is confirmed as a starter, and he was not in Fantasy Crunch when we first started the show, but he is in there now that he's confirmed. As for the Cubs, yeah, it does appear that Stewart is pitching.
Stewart. Okay. Oh, Cole. Yeah, there we go. Okay, that came in the updated lineup.
Yeah, and I'm opening up just Sportsbook right now to see what the total is for the game and whatnot. But at least in the numbers we had, it did look like the Padres are a fairly high priority team to get to. We have them with a 14% chance to be the top stack of the day. And even though they're going a little bit over-owned, the 14% chance is by a little bit of a margin, the best overall top stack odds of the day. We have the Padres at 14%, and then the Twins at the second best at 10.5%. So I'm not going to be quite as high on the Padres as the field as I'm updating my lineups right now, but still, a team with a 14% chance of being a top stack on a 9-game slate, that's somewhat of a priority.
Also, Cole Stewart, if he's the starter, he has not pitched this season or last season in the majors. So something where I guess I don't think you could assume him to play very many innings. So probably a bullpen day. And I guess the one thing worth pointing out too is the wind is blowing directly out in Wrigley, just shy of 10 miles per hour. So I think that's part of the ownership. It's a lot of ownership going to the Padres, and Cole Stewart, I guess I don't have the best read on him. Like, I have to assume he's going to pitch short, and it's a good bullpen, giving up just a 1.2 whip with a 29% K rate behind him. I have some concerns about this spot, Greg, for the Padres hitters, where, like, if it's one guy who's a mediocre pitcher, which I feel like the ownership would indicate or would have indicated that it was like, oh, they're going to get somebody easy who's going to give up a lot of fly balls that can just soar out of the park. But Stewart is not like, he's not good by any stretch, but he does a decent job of keeping the ball down, only a 25% fly ball rate. And then the bullpen is good behind him. I have some concern that the Padres stack could just be a little bit of a trap on this big of a slate where you have this much ownership going there.
Yeah, and I don't know if this changes your mind at all, but I just pulled up because there are sportsbook numbers for this game now, and the implied team total for the Padres is about 5.5 runs.
That's big.
So that is pretty substantial. At least the sportsbook that I have open right now, the run total for the Padres, it's set at 5.5 with a little bit of juice on the under, but it does look to be the highest for any individual team on the slate by a bit of a margin.
Yes, I mean, I honestly, it does seem like the top stacks tool would indicate that there should be a little bit more, a little bit more interest going there, and it does also seem like the ownership is going to really heavily be going towards on DraftKings Fernando Tatis, Will Myers, and Tommy Pham. So it looks like that 3-man stack is really one that's on an optimizer going to come up quite a bit. But you have some guys like Machado, Cronenworth, Eric Hosmer, these guys all under 10% or at least at 10% ownership. I think those guys to me would be ones to prioritize a little bit more in terms of stacking, but that's a very high total. So I guess I'm kind of surprised by the total being that high, but it definitely, if you're going by Vegas totals, which you should be doing on a day-to-day basis, a lot of reason to go to the Padres. Greg, for you with the Padres hitters, is there anything you would do to try to mitigate the Tatis ownership? That is more than a third of the field being on this guy. And we know he's fantastic. Obviously can get results anywhere, especially with the wind blowing out under 10 miles an hour, but still that's 33% of the field on a slate this big is a pretty crazy bit of ownership.
Yeah, and let's see, where am I at with him at the moment? And so he is my highest owned shortstop right now, but the 31% is a number that I am not quite going to be getting to, and he is running incredibly well right now. He's homered in like 3 of his last 4 games at this point. He also had that massive home run against the Astros the other day to tie the game up when it was 6-3. He had a 3-run home run in the 9th inning to tie the game up at 6, but whenever there's a slate that's this big and there's a guy who's rostered in over 30% of lineups, I still think it's worth getting to him, but the 30% number is a little bit too rich for me, especially when I'm trying to prioritize pay up for pitchers like Corbin Burns, certainly on both sites. One pitcher site like Fanduel, I think you want to have Corbin Burns in almost all your lineups, and same goes for DraftKings too. But even when the second best pitching option I like is Carlos Rodon, is also fairly expensive, it's hard for me to prioritize paying up for a shortstop at the same time. So he's going to be in the lineup in some of my lineups, except if I have to have a choice and say like, hey, one lineup, am I paying up for Corbin Burns and or Carlos Rodon or Fernando Tatis? It's going to be the pitchers every time.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that's a reasonable way to look at it too. And some lofty price tags for some of the other guys as well. So maybe keep that in mind when you're trying to correlate your ownership appropriately. On the other side, we have Chris Paddock going against the Cubs. Paddock, to me, again, with the wind here, that's going to give loftier Vegas totals than I would have guessed when we didn't have him earlier before the show. I feel like Paddock, to me, another guy not striking guys out on the year. Maybe that'll get better. I would hope that gets better for him. 20.6% K rate, has historically been a 25% K rate guy since 2019. But in this spot, I don't expect him to get better. The price tag isn't that great. And the Cubs bats going against him, I don't know if they're going to have crazy success either. There's another good bullpen for San Diego behind Paddock as well. And Paddock not giving up a lot of power, just a 2.3% on run rate on the year too. So to me, this side of the equation in particular, I might be less down on the game or a little bit more down on the game than the field will be in general. But I feel like this spot for the Cubs and Paddock, I don't know, Greg, that I really love either side at all and really wouldn't want to be too much of either side.
Yeah, I'm going to feel differently than you about the Cubs, a team that we have with a 4.5% chance being a top stack on the slate and then only picking up 2% ownership right now. So the Cubs look like pretty positively leveraged. And Chris Paddock, there's still some name value here, but he's just not nearly the same pitcher that he was when he first broke into the big leagues. So it's not like he stinks or anything like that, except the swing and miss numbers not there anymore. The velocity's still there, except his strikeout rate over the last 3 years, his rookie year, where he actually competed with Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso had one of the best hitting seasons we've ever seen from a rookie. And there was still a debate at the time whether the rookie of the year should go to Chris Paddock or Pete Alonso, at least earlier on in the season. And ever since then, Paddock's just slowly declined his K rate over the last 3 years. He's gone from a 26.9% K rate to 23.7 to 20.6. And then when you also consider the conditions in this game where the wind is going to be blowing out and there's a guy who's all of a sudden allowing a lot more contact than he did a couple of years ago, it's not hard to see how he could get in trouble against the Cubs lineup that's a little top heavy, except there's still some strong bats in the order. And so with that in mind, and the field not being on the Cubs at all with any significant ownership, I like being overweight to the field on Chicago.
Okay, I get it. I just see the price tags up top, especially Jock Peterson. Like if you're stacking this team up 5,700, and certainly some ways you could just maybe not get his full run of at bats if they bring a lefty off the out of the bullpen afterwards. I get it. I get the potential here, but it's really high price tags and a pitcher in Paddock that I think just gets a little bit better than he's been. To me, I don't love the game environment quite as much, but that's me talking to you without looking at the run totals in my face. Greg pulled them during the show here as we got the information coming in, but I still see 0-0 for all of them. So that to me is going to make me less interested. I can't get there mentally. Let's do a quick run of money time here because we did get some ownership updates about 10 minutes ago. So let me flip the hat and give you guys a top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and Fanduel. Of course, our ownership projections at awesemo.com/join. If you missed the show over the weekend as well, I did have a nice little win in the NBA world. And I have to honestly, for my process, like I build my own projections using Awesemo data, but I do use the ownership projections to sort everything. And that's to me the big part of it, where you're trying to identify what the field's going to be doing. You're trying to figure out whether people are going to be, and then hopefully you can make some pivots off it. And for baseball, as Greg can tell you during all these shows and does tell you during all these shows, most important thing you do for baseball is just kind of knowing where the field is going to be and trying to just get a little bit different from that target. So check out the ownership projections for yourself at awesemo.com/join. Should be a big part of your process every day. Top 5 on DraftKings zone. Number 1 looking like Corbin Burns at 61%. Number 2, Carlos Rodon projected for 32%. Number 3, Fernando Tatis, 31% now. Number 4, Will Myers at 22%. And number 5, Jose Barrios at 22% on FanDuel. Top 5 looks like it'll be Corbin Burns, number 1 at 48%. Number 2, Freddie Freeman at 33%. I guess that game is on the FanDuel slate. Number 3, Fernando Tatis, 31%. Number 4, Eugenio Suarez at 27%. And number 5, Ronald Acuna at 25% for FanDuel as well. So go check out the ownership projections for yourself. Get them in your life every day at awesemo.com/join. Next game up, we got the Angels, 3.5 implied runs against Johnny Cueto. Johnny Cueto been back to mostly mediocre stuff on the year, 20% K rate for himself, giving up a 286 batting average, and does seem like he's maybe been a bit unlucky. 3.5 xFIP does seem like there should be better days ahead, as well as the 350 BABIP he's had, just a little bit loftier than it should be. He's facing an Angels team that does hit righties decently well, 172 ISO on the year. So Cueto, to me, Greg, I feel like the price tag, I get why 10% of the field will be there. If you had 10%, I wouldn't be the most opposed. But the Angels don't strike out a ton, and Cueto doesn't seem to have stuff to get it done. So if you came in under on Cueto too, I feel like that might be the more logical approach.
Yeah, Cueto isn't somebody who's in my player pool, I don't think at all right now. I'm just uploading the latest. I have one Cueto lineup, so a little under 1% exposure to Johnny Cueto. So very, very low priority play for me. And to me, I mean, it's really the matchup more than anything. And also that ballpark that we've seen in San Francisco has now moved into being more of a hitter's ballpark as opposed to before. It used to be a really strong pitcher's park. And just the Angels overall as a team, it's a tough lineup to go against, even without Mike Trout in there. It's a team that, like you said, doesn't strike out all that much. But the Angels themselves also not a really high priority. We only have them with a 4% chance of being a top stack. So I think it's a spot where Johnny Cueto himself has been good enough this year to where I don't think we need to go out of our way to stack against him. But at the same time, there isn't enough strikeout upside there to the point where I think that he's all that viable of a DFS option.
On the other side, we have Dylan Bundy going against a Giants team with 4.5 implied runs their way. Giants Park been playing a little bit better for power for enough of a period of time now to make sure to note that as part of your process. And Bundy has kind of regressed this year, down the 24% K rate for himself, which is flat with his 2019 numbers, though down from where he was going back to last season. And he is getting hit pretty hard, at least an occasion, 8.8% barrel ball rate, not that bad overall. But the 4.5% on run rate for him given up is not a great number. And this Giants team has had pretty good pop against righties on the year with a 178 ISO. They also strike out above league average for a 28% K rate. So I think you can make the case for both sides of this one, Greg, where Bundy maybe should be getting more strikes than he has. His swing strike rate's down, but not enough so that he can't have tournament upside, I think, from game to game. I actually would favor his 8% ownership over the 10% ownership going to Johnny Cueto's way, given the way that Bundy's cheaper. But Bundy's also been just kind of mediocre on the year, where I don't know that I expect him to be great here. And if he is closer to the mediocrity he's kind of shown all year, do you think the Giants can get to him with some of the power they have? So maybe this is a spot where I would get some Giants bats. I think getting some Bundy, and I think both, Greg, would be viable tournament options to me, but how are you viewing it?
Yeah, I like the Giants as a bit of a contrarian stack here. It's actually an offense that I've liked quite a bit over the last few weeks now. And there's a couple of things here. First of all, with Dylan Bundy, he does have 6.5 ERA. He's going to be better than that going forward. He's a 3.96 expected ERA. But when Bundy does give up runs, home runs are a massive issue for him. And we've seen him a few times this year when he's had bad outings. He can give up a handful of home runs. There was one game actually a few years ago. I don't know if you remember this, but this is something that always kind of sticks out to me with Dylan Bundy whenever he's going up against an offense. I think is a little bit of upside that's also low owned. There was a game where Dylan Bundy was going up against the Kansas City Royals where Bundy was like chalk of the slate. I think he was like 50% owned or something like that. And he ended up giving up, I think it was 4 home runs and 8 runs in the first inning of that game. And ever since then, I've always had that game in the back of my head and always thought about Dylan Bundy. When he goes bad, he's going to give up home runs. And that's also one of the reasons I always think it makes, a little bit of sense to go against him. His last 2 starts, he's given up a total of 4 homers. He definitely doesn't appear to be in good form right now. Last 3 outings for Bundy, 3 innings, 6 runs, 4 innings, 7 runs, 2 innings, 4 runs. So Dylan Bundy struggling right now. Maybe it's something a little off mechanically. I think this is a good spot to go after the Giants.
Yeah, I could see that here. And yeah, definitely Bundy not looking the most impressive on the year. So you could talk me into either side of him getting a little better for the spot or getting a little bit worse. And I think that's me is sort of what you want a tournament option is one where you can see the case both ways. And as a result, the field's not going to be heavily owning them for either direction of it. So, but not a lot of ownership going to Bundy, not a lot going to the Giants either. Next game up, we got the Whites. Also, Greg, I realized the Fanduel slate apparently has 2 more games than the Draftkings slate does, but those 2 games are ones that we're going to be covering on the deeper dive. So I don't know if you prepped them, but that just something to note here as we get down the home stretch.
Yeah, no, I am. I'm aware. That was why at the top I said it's one of the reasons I said it's a little bit of a wonky slate, but also it's really uncharacteristic that we have lock at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and then there's games that start 4 hours later for a couple reasons. Number one, there's no chance of getting lineups for those games at that point in time. But yeah, that's also something where at least we have pitchers right now because we didn't come into the day with all the pitchers known.
That's true. Yeah, we got to take the victories where we can get them, and that does include some of these games coming up here, and we'll cover them as best we can. We got the White Sox getting. I actually don't have the implied run totals for this one because I think they came out throughout the show. Going against Tristan McKenzie on their side, we have Cleveland going against Carlos Rodon on their side. McKenzie been one of those other really volatile pitchers on the year. 30% K rate for himself, has been missing bats pretty well overall with a 13.4% swing strike rate. So the K rate does check out. It's not something that's an aberration, but he is getting hit hard. He's also given up a lot of walks, a 1.6 whip for himself on the year, 5.4 xFIP. And it's just, to me, McKenzie, one of those guys where if he's getting hit, and he certainly can get hit by a White Sox team that is not doing the best overall in the year, but a 110 WRC plus, creating runs 10% better than average. And McKenzie giving up a 27.7 degree launch angle. So if they're making contact with this ball, it could definitely go out of the park, Greg. And that to me would give me enough concern for McKenzie at his price tag, where I don't know how you can get to him. He's not pitching deep enough into games to sort of justify the price, but he certainly can get hit hard. So I feel like maybe you don't get to McKenzie at all, and maybe you do get some more White Sox bats.
Well, so don't forget also, this is a doubleheader. So this is a 7-inning game. And so with that in mind, I rarely like to make it a priority to target some of these offenses in 7-inning games, just because, there's a chance that everybody gets one less at bat. And then something else to mention also, for some reason, DraftKings has opted to include 7-inning games this year where FanDuel hasn't. So this game, not an option on FanDuel, is on DraftKings. So something else that's different about the 2 sites across this slate. But so as for the offenses go, if I had to roster one of them, it would definitely be the White Sox side over the Cleveland side. But even with that said, this being a 7-inning game, as is, we only had the White Sox with a 2.8% chance to be the top scoring team of the day. Now you also factor in it's a 7-inning game instead of a 9-inning game, and it's just really low priority of this team going off.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable way to look at it. And yeah, I forgot about the 7-inning part, but that definitely does decrease the opportunity for sacks. We talk about how sometimes just, being the away team gives you that extra chance of an at bat in the 9th inning. Imagine just losing a few more of those innings. It's not the best outcomes overall, especially for these guys who are not cheaper on DraftKings either. They're priced pretty much to the gills for most of these guys. Like Yohan Moncada paying $5,700 for a game where he's going to get less opportunity. It does seem like a tough one. The other side, we have Carlos Rodon. The pitching, though, if you wanted to play McKenzie, I don't think that's an inhibitor there. Same thing for Carlos Rodon, who is pitching for the White Sox. 38.5% K rate for him on the year. Pretty much as good as Corbin Burns, except a little bit higher launch angle. That does mean there should be some power issues that can come at some of the warmer weather days, but only 66 degrees today in Cleveland. So that's one, or at first pitch for Cleveland. So that's something that should help out Rodon a little bit. He is facing a team, though, Greg, that has less strikeouts. And that's part of why, to me, Rodon, I think, a perfectly fine play today, one to get to if you can. But Burns is a more appealing option going against a weaker team. This Cleveland team only strikes out at a 22.3% clip against lefties on the year. The lineup they have today projected doesn't look that much worse either. So to me, Rodon's a good play, but a clear number 2 in how I'm viewing it.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing also with this slate is the pitching options are so weak that I'm still kind of making it a priority to try to get lineups with both Corbin Burns and Carlos Rodon. So I have Corbin Burns in about 90% of my lineups, but Rodon's still in about half of my lineups as well. So, that means that I have, let's see, pulling them up together right now. Like 40% of my lineups have Rodon and Burns in them together. So with that in mind, I don't have an issue paying up for pitching and then just going cheap at offense. So I think that the best way to go about building lineups is doing what you can, honestly, with relatively weak pitching options to try to pair Burns and Rodon together.
Yeah, so there you go. So is there a stack you're getting to, or that you feel comfortable getting to more than the field to get those two guys together that we haven't hit on, I guess, maybe, or that we have?
So one that we have hit on just for leverage purposes is, since we earlier talked about the ownership on Jameson Taillon and how highly owned he is, I think that the Rays are one of the stacks that makes sense. I'm not having too much trouble stacking them with both Burns and Rodon as my pitchers. Let's see, what are some of the other ones where I'm getting them together? Chicago Cubs, we talked about them before. I have to mix in some of the cheaper guys towards the bottom of the order, like Patrick Wisdom, who is at 3,100 on DraftKings. And then we have Ian Happ. He's reasonably priced at 4,400. Somebody like Eric Sogard, 3,600. So those seem to be the two offenses I'm getting most often with Rodon and Burns as the pitchers.
All right, let's keep it going here. We got a few more games to get to, maybe even more than a few. We got Boston, 4.5 implied runs against Jose Urquidy. Urquidy on the year, strikeout rate's been down even further. It's 18.6%. Still does a good job limiting production, a 1.02 whip, or a 1.03 whip on the year, a 1.02 since last season. So keeping everything in line for the most part, but not a great fantasy pitcher because of the lack of strikeout upside. As a result, I don't see the reason to get there. The field's going to be on him about 1%, but it's not a great strikeout match against Boston either. They do strike out at a 25.5% clip against right-hand pitching on the year, but overall, not that big over league average. And they have a lot of dangerous power, 196 ISO on the year against right-hand pitching. And I guess to me, Greg, like, I don't love them going against Urquidy. Urquidy's been good enough in limiting production that I think Boston bats are appealing to some extent, but they look a little bit overowned according to the top stacks tool. So to me, capping that ownership would still be a thing I would do. And Urquidy, to me, not a play either. So do you like the Boston bats? Do you have any interest at all in Jose Urquidy?
No, it's a game where if Boston was lower owned, which actually coming into the show, Boston had one of the more positive leverage scores on the slate. But then as we've gotten a run total, it's come out for the Chicago-San Diego game. And then I think there was one other spot where we didn't have a confirmed starting pitcher. We did now. But either way, the Red Sox word team, as we started the show about an hour ago, we're going really under-owned, and now they look really over-owned on DraftKings. We have them at 8.4% chance to be a top stack, but an 11.4% ownership share. So with that in mind, Boston's the team to be underweight to the field on.
And the ownership, it looks like on DraftKings in particular, going to go heavily to the cheaper guys, the Kike Hernandez and Alex Verdugo up top, very affordable price tags. Those guys will be over 15%, just shy of 20% between them. And also Danny Santana, it looks like, will be also over 15% owned as a cheap guy. So if you want to get different here, you pay up for the more expensive bats in the middle, guys like JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers. Those guys should have a good shot at having a positive outcome relative to whatever Urquidy is going to give up. And they are going to be much less owned. On the other side, we have Eduardo Rodriguez going against Houston. Houston doesn't strike out against anybody, but they really don't strike out against lefties. 17% K rate on the year against lefties. Rodriguez's stuff has been pretty good. 26% K rate for himself, but he's also given up a 290 batting average. 3.3 xFIP means that I guess he's been better than what he's given up overall, but it does seem like there's maybe some room for more Houston production there would be for Rodriguez. I don't see the reason to play much Rodriguez at all unless that price tag works perfectly and you really want to get weird and get the ownership product down with some higher owned stacks. But to me, Greg, Rodriguez not really a factor. Houston in play, but also looking a little bit overowned.
Yeah, so there's a lot of weaker pitching options on the slate, and Rodriguez is not one of them. He's not quite the same pitcher he was a couple of years ago. He also had some issues with COVID last year. He ended up developing a heart condition. Maybe that's factored into his a little bit of a drop off this year, but still, I think that he's good enough to where I don't really want to run to go roster the Houston Astros. But at the same time, too, the Astros present such a difficult matchup that even with some of the weaker pitching options on the slate, Eduardo Rodriguez isn't somebody I want to get to at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a good way that I will be on the same page with as well. A good way to approach it. Houston bats, if you had to play any here, are there any jumping out? I feel like Bregman against lefties, those splits have been really strong for enough years now. A 320 ISO against lefties since 2019. That jumps out to me as more of a one-off, I think, than trying to get to the full stack. But for Astros bats, Greg, any that you would really want to prioritize if you were somebody out there who wanted to play the Astros desperately?
Just roster other teams. I mean, the Houston Astros for today, if we look at them in the top stacks tool, we have them with just a 5% chance of being the top stack of the day, and then about a 6% ownership share. So maybe a little bit overowned, but it's a low probability stack. It's a fairly tough matchup. That in Houston, there's still a lot of expensive hitters in the lineup. So to me, I'd be looking to go elsewhere. I don't know. Have we gotten the Houston lineup yet? I'm just curious by the way, we just got it 4 minutes ago. So let's see what we have here. We have Altuve. I guess who's sitting second. That was not something I was expecting. I was more curious if Yordan Alvarez is returning to the lineup today, which he is not. This is a weaker Astros lineup than normal. We've got our guy Chaz hitting second, and then a pretty steep drop off after the top 5 hitters. Because then we have, other than also Chaz hitting second, but then it's Diaz hitting 6th, Jones 7th, Straw 8th, Maldonado 9th. I don't really like this Astros lineup much today, although I do think McCormick is fine as a one-off for value purposes.
Yeah, McCormick 2,600, and he'll be hitting into 2-hole for Houston today. So not a bad option. As a righty going against a lefty as well. So that's something that could give him a little more pop. But Houston still, I think this lineup, I agree with your initial take that does look a little bit weaker here. You still have Bregman in the mix, and but you still have some quality hitters as well. But maybe the bottom of the order in particular, Taylor Jones, Miles Straw being in there, not the highest probability guys to have a good day. Last game on the DK slate, and then I guess we'll breeze through the ones that remain on the all-day slate on Fanduel. But we got Oakland 4.1 implied runs going against Logan Gilbert. Logan Gilbert's been pretty bad on the year. It's facing an Oakland team that doesn't strike out a lot, does have dangerous power. Oakland bats to me look more in play than Gilbert does, Greg, but neither jumping out super meaningfully. I guess Oakland's bats, you can talk me into a little bit more. They do seem 2% less owned than they should be, according to the top stacks tool. And besides that, and I guess a lot of the ownership too going to Matt Olson. So it's really not the stack picking up ownership as much as it is Olson. Going against Gilbert, I guess I don't mind really. And Oakland, not a great run total and not a great park either, but a stack that to me, if you got more than a field on, probably a good move.
Yeah, especially on Fanduel, where we have them with one of the most positive leverage scores on the entire slate. So both Fanduel and DraftKings, I think Oakland is a team to get to, but Fanduel in particular, they're a team that I think should be a fairly high priority for today. And then also what you said before, a lot of ownership going to Matt Olson, but not really to anybody else. So any 5-man stack of Oakland, I think is going to be relatively low owned.
Also, Ramon Laureano's still 5,800. I thought that was a short slate thing, and he is still 5,800. And Matt Chapman's 5,000. What is going on with the pricing here?
I couldn't tell you. But yeah, that's also something that's contributing to some of the pricing. Because, like Jed Lowry, he's more reasonably priced. I think he's somebody to get to. Seth Brown, somebody else to get to. And also, there's wildly different pricing on FanDuel versus DraftKings on these players. But I would ignore some of the price tag on somebody like Laureano. And by the way, also Laureano, I don't think he's played since that game.
Well, how could he after he was hit that apex and now they're just keeping him high? I mean, more power to Laureano, I guess, being a worthwhile in the eyes of the DK pricing team, but not quite so much, I think, for Greg and myself. And we do have James Caprali, and people were asking about earlier in the chat, but we're going game by game, so we got to get there when we get there. Capralian's been really good on the year, though the price tag is now high enough that I don't think he's quite as good as a $9,100 price tag on DraftKings. 27% K rate for him on the year. It's an okay matchup against Seattle with their 25.6% K rate against right-hand pitching, but they're mediocre. We know that they can get no hits, so I don't think Capralian's going to do that at this point in his career. But he's pitching about 6 innings per appearance. Does have some troubling signs, I think, in terms of power, giving up a really good launch angle for home runs, 26-degree launch angle, 4.8 xFIP, also a good amount of hard contact. But Capralian, if you really like him at that price tag, you can play him. I still think finding the money gets a Burns, even finding the money gets a Barrios, I think would be a better move than playing Capralian today. And the Seattle Hitters, I have no faith in them, Greg. So to me, this side of the equation, I don't think either part's the most necessary for lineups today.
Yeah, so Capralian is somebody who actually, I think it was that same slate where we had the Laureano slate,
Yep.
where we're making fun of Laureano's price tag. Also, the last time Laureano's been in the lineup for the A's. But Capralian was a guy who that slate that both of us were looking at, and it was a 4-game slate or a 5-game slate. I don't remember exactly how many games, but it was a short slate with not that many pitching options. I guess it would have been 5 days ago because it was the last time Capralian started. He pitched well. He was one of the better options on the slate. And we liked him a lot that day. But here's the difference now. His price has gone up by 2,000. And now we're at a point where literally if you want to roster Caprali, the opportunity cost is he's priced in the same range as guys like Carlos Rodon and Corbin Burns. Those are far better pitchers with much longer track record. So Capralian, I think both of us think that he's probably a fine young starting pitcher going forward, but he doesn't warrant the kind of ownership he's getting right now, or the kind of price tag he has right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And yeah, certainly a young arm to watch. Certainly a guy who can have better days moving forward, but he probably shouldn't be priced where he is. And he also, honestly, not getting enough swinging strikes and chase rate to justify the 27% strikeout rate that he's had so far this year. And that gives me some cause for concern here, where people are chasing that day that they had, and it is, on paper, a good matchup against Seattle. You might just get kind of screwed here by Capralian because he's, a guy that I think is going to get a little bit worse, even though he looked great. It's all relative to situations and price tags and slate size and all of that. And Capralian, a guy I think probably a day to jump off the train more than not. The last 2 games I think that are going to be FanDuel exclusives that I'll be talking about more in the deeper dive coming up in 3 hours, or I guess 2 hours with Terry McBride, because we're going to cover this all again. But Greg, do you have any thoughts on the final 2 games? Because I don't even have on my sheet right now because they weren't on the DK slate. But I guess actually was it 4 games? This FanDuel slate is ridiculous.
It's not the best. I don't like when the games are this far spread out, just because it's so hard to get information on some of the later spots. So I actually have some lineups because I'm playing on FanDuel and Draftkings today, where I just left some lineup spots kind of open for now, and then I'm going to wait to see what the lineups are. And I have lineups where it's like, hey, I have Corbin Burns as the pitcher, and then the hitters right now are just random guys in later spots, and I plan to just build some of those lineups with stacks from later games, just because I assume they're going to have really low ownership, because we're not going to have the lineups until like 2 hours after the slate starts.
Yeah, so it's not the best timing. I guess out of the teams that remain, Greg, and I guess the pitching and the hitting, does any of the pitching and hitting stand out for you? Because I guess on FanDuel, you do have Jacob deGrom in the spot, and I think that does sort of change the game. You also have Trevor Bauer and Jack Flaherty on FanDuel, which it just makes it a completely different slate in a way that I'm not fully prepared to talk about with any sort of depth. Like, those guys should be more in play on FanDuel, but also like it's so far away right now that like, what if one of these guys gets scratched? I would have some concern here that I would still have more faith going to Burns and all of that. But for pitching, does anybody jump out that you would really meaningfully add to a player pool based on these FanDuel games?
So the Mets game isn't on the slate.
Why is it? Okay, well, fuck it all.
It's because that one's a double header, right?
It's it's on the all-day slate. That's why.
Okay, well, there we go. Yeah.
So FanDuel doesn't have extra. Oh, they just have the Washington game. That's the extra game. It's replacing the doubleheader game. Okay, thank you, Tyler. I'm sorry. I see you making gestures now. I get it. I was looking at the all-day slate. FanDuel's confusing. I don't know what to tell you.
So it's Charlie Morton versus Joe Ross. So the Atlanta Braves, we have them picking up a decent amount of ownership right now. However, I'm not sure that's actually going to be the case, just because I don't know that we're going to have the lineup for a little while, and I don't know how many people are going to be dying to roster players from a game where the confirmed lineup isn't going to be 2 hours until after lock. So while the data points towards that there should be ownership going to the Braves, I don't know if that's actually going to be the case in practicality, just because I don't know that people like to roster players and they don't know who's actually playing.
Yeah, that tends to be a good way to approach sports in general, just trying to know the players that are playing. Do you want to do a home run pick for the slate just to close it out? I feel like we should do something here, because instead of just me sputtering out here by being baffled by the FanDuel slates and how they approach things.
I prefer you being baffled, but we could do home run picks too.
I'll let you go first because I don't really know who I want to go to.
All right. I am just going to pull up my ownership, and then let's see who's a guy that I have a bunch of exposure to that maybe isn't quite as high rostered as the field, and I'll let that be my home run pick. Will Myers, a little bit of wind blowing out. I like the Padres offense today. It's actually an offense before we talked about all the ownership that was going towards them. Ownership update, the Padres are now going a little bit under-owned. So with that in mind, Padres now a team that's even a little bit more of a priority. So Will Myers, and as a bonus pick, Tommy Pham, who's all of a sudden hitting well again, leads off fairly cheap for For the Padres, he has something double-digit fantasy points in something like 9 of his last 11 games. So Tommy Pham and Will Myers going to pick two home run picks, and I hope that gives you enough time to find somebody.
I'm going to go to, I'm torn because of the lefties in Tampa Bay, but I do like your thought of the Tampa Bay stack going against Tyon, and I'm going to take a home run guy against him too. I'm going to take Austin Meadows. G-Man Choi and Brandon Lau, I think, also perfectly fine plays. But Meadow does get a little better launch angle generally and barrels the ball about as much. So Tyon always struggled more against lefties. 4.1% on run rate since 2019, allowed a 1.5 whip compared to a 0.93 whip against righties. So the lefties hopefully get it done here. And Greg, what else are you doing today? I feel like you're on NBA Live Before Lock, if I'm recalling correctly. But what other shows can people check you out on this fine Memorial Day?
Yeah, NBA Live Before Lock, I'll be doing that. And other than that, I'll not be enjoying the weather because it's gone from 96 degrees to in the 40s in New Jersey.
Yeah, I will also be grinding out a deeper dive coming up in 2 hours. And then the tip off as well. We're still doing that show as part of the NBA block. So tune into both of those on the channel. Follow at Ehrenberg DFS. Follow at Kris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Make sure to check out all the content we have going on because the grind never stops here. We appreciate all of you guys hanging out with us for this Memorial Day. Take some time also, if you can, to remember the folks out there who have given themselves and to the name of country and the honor of country and all of that. And just so you guys can play DFS on a day like this one. So try not to forget the reason for the day as well. We appreciate you guys being here. Enjoy your days and good luck.